Okay. So we got all sorts of stuff to go over today. So we are one of the big things. So some of you are not in a happy place grade-wise. So just a reminder for this class, we have a non-standard grading scale. So in order to get passing, you need to be above 68%. So those of you that are not above passing, that is what you need to get before passing for the class. So some people have a whole lot of work between now and the end of the semester to make sure that you actually graduate. So please, please, please make sure you put the work in. Um, so again, how things are weighted. The practical exams and tests are 50%. For this particular set of modules, we will do 2 practical exams week 16 on Tuesday and Thursday of finals week. Make sure you're here. Make sure your schedules are cleared out now. You have to be here to take those exams. If you miss those exams, you get a 0. Big deal. So just putting it out there now. Week 16. May 16th is graduation week. So graduation is Saturday. Oh, yes, good excuse. So basically, if you have an excuse like that, and you have orders or you have a doctor's, letter saying that I am out because I had surgery or something like that, that's cool. But if you just don't show up, you get a 0. So just a heads up on that one. It's worth roughly 25% of your total grade for the semester. So the practicals is broken parts. First day is a build. Second day is you use what you build. They're separated by a day in between. So if day 1 goes horribly awry, you can fix your world to get it so that you can actually take day 2, because otherwise you can't do day 2 unless day 1 is done. So it is an important thing to be able to do that. So it is worth a whole lot of points. So just a heads up on that you'd want to be prepared. All of the labs that you're doing will prepare you to sit for the practical exam. If you do not do the exam, you will not be prepared to do the practical exam, and most likely will not be able to do the practical exam. So the labs are really, really important for this. So just a heads up going in that this is going to be a different type of workload than last 8 weeks, and is going to be a heavier workload than the last 8 weeks, because you're going to have a lot of build, because you're going to have to build servers, go through a couple labs, destroy those servers, build more servers, build a couple labs. I try having it that you go through as many labs as possible before you pull everything down. But at one point, you will have 7 servers that you have built. And it's going to be a combination of Linux and Windows servers. So it is one that there is going to be a lot of build. Everybody has a blade. I got all the blades certified over spring break. They're all nice and clean. I have a ISO stores mounted to them, so everybody has the same images to work from. So it should be in a pretty good place for starting this out. Okay, also a reminder on late work, because late work has been a problem in this class. That I can basically count things if they're late, no points. And I may start having to do that for the last 8 weeks because it's been a problem. Because there's a bunch of you guys, I really want you guys to graduate. And right now, a couple of you, I'm very worried about graduating. So I really want to make sure that you figure out how to fix that so that you get to graduate and we actually get you through. And then this also is a reminder about the exam itself, that if you miss your practical exam, you get a 0. And it's also a reminder on that one, because that's the other one that's been a problem in this class for some people. That attendance, if you do hit 50%, you can get academically withdrawn from the class. So just make sure that you're actually showing up. Okay, so what are we going to be doing for the rest of this semester? So what we're going to be doing is going to be Microsoft SQL Server. And so Microsoft SQL Server, so we played with RDS last semester with AWS, which is Relational Database Services. One of those options was actually Microsoft SQL Server, although we never got to play with it because we just played with Linux stuff and with MySQL because it was faster. And especially to spin up in a lab type environment. We're going to go and we're going to be initially spinning up Microsoft SQL Server on Linux, which is one of those crazy things that just started happening as a possibility about 4 years ago. And so Microsoft finally realized that Linux is a cool thing, and that it's not the evil thing that they tried killing for about 15 years. Yeah. Yep. They're in here. They're in here. Yeah, they're in here during the class period. Yeah. So it's not locked down. It is one that you get to use resources. So it is one of those that is open book, open note, open web type thing. You can even use ChatGPT, but it's going to be time constrained. Time is going to be your enemy in that one. And so it's that knowing how to do things. Because if you don't know how to do them, doesn't care what resources you have, you aren't going to be able to do it. Yeah. Yeah, you have to be able to have gone through it once in the lab so you understand what the concepts are. If you do that, they're actually really easy. But if you haven't done them first and you try doing them, that's where people get really bad on. Yeah. Yep. Skip.
Are we going to be doing both this 2 a week?
2 a week is pretty much what the pace is going to be, but they're big labs. Each lab is looking at 4 hours or more. About it's what it's going to take to build them. Yeah. And these labs, the big thing about these labs is I skip over what you learned last semester. And they aren't cookbook labs. So last semester you had cookbook labs that said do step A, B, C, D, E. You're done. These are build this environment that has a domain server and a Red Hat 8.7 server. On top of this environment, you have built start the lab. So it's a very different type of environment of labs than what you guys have dealt with before. You guys are just about to the point of graduating. This is basically you're taking the skills you've learned, you're applying the skills you've learned. First week or so is going to probably be a little bumpy because you've forgotten some of these skills. You're a little rusty on these skills. The place to get refreshers on the skills is going to be in here with me. That's what I'm here for as a resource. Yes. Includes building them. Building them is usually the most painful part. The blades I beefed up the memory in the blades. I made the ISO mounts be remote so that you can actually have more storage. So I tried optimizing these as best I can. A couple of them I was able to upgrade the version of ESX to 6.7. So I've tried tweaking this as much as I can to speed them up where I can. The build process takes the longest. One thing about the build process, don't try building more than 3 servers at a time. So the pretty much the blades that you guys are going to be working on, if you go 3 servers, they'll actually build in about 30 minutes. If you go more than 3 servers, you'll probably be an hour or more. Because what happens is you get into a memory-starved place, and then each server tries sort of using a little bit at a time, and then it takes forever. So usually 3 is about the most servers that you're going to be building at a time. You will need your Red Hat ID because when you build your Red Hat server, one of the things you have to do is actually connect to Red Hat to get your updates. So if you, hopefully you guys, since you've been taking Red Hat Academy and all that, you should remember your Red Hat ID. You will need to remember that. If not, we'll work on that. Also, that's another thing this week. I'm a resource to help you guys get through all that because things that you're going to need this week to make things successful. VMware Enterprise or VMware Workstation 17 Pro installed on your laptops. So if you don't have 17, make sure you upgrade to 17, and then you need to get the current license key because that's where you're going to do most of your remote management from. Before 17, version 16 had some weird issues with Windows 10 occasionally and did some flaky stuff. So upgrading to 17 will fix that. So that's one thing you need to have your Red Hat ID. Yes. Yeah. That's what I'm going to be here as a resource for. Yeah, and also double checking your VMware licenses on your VMware Workstation licenses on your laptop to make sure it doesn't expire. The worst thing to have it expire is like during or the day before or morning of a practical exam. The ESX servers themselves do not expire until the Friday of finals week, so you don't have to worry about. Normally, that is something that I also have you guys do the licensing on. I was able to get the demo license, which doesn't expire until that day. Yeah. So the first day is so the week before practical, you'll have a lab, which is basically you build the servers. So base servers. And then the first day is going to be, I'm going to have an environment design, and I say, build this SQL environment on top of that with these user accounts and these databases. And then the next day is going to be, do these security settings, do these users, and run these queries. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first couple servers, first couple labs, what it'll be is for lab 1, you're going to be building your internet gateway. So you're going to build a gateway server. You're going to build a Red Hat Enterprise 0.7 server. You're going to build a domain controller and a memory. So you're going to have 4 servers that you're going to build for lab 1. For lab 2, you're going to use those 4 servers again. So you don't have to build anything for lab 2. Well, you keep building. For lab 3, you're going to add 2 more servers. And then you're going to live in that environment for a while. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. You build a gateway once and you're done. Yeah. So for the first 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 4 or 5 weeks, we're going to be building off of each lab. We're just going to keep going. And then we're going to get to the clustering lab. We're going to basically wipe everything but the gateway. And then for that one, then we're going to be building a Windows clustered environment, which I don't know if you guys got to last semester. So that one's going to, basically I have a week that we're just going to do that one lab. Because what you do is you do domain controller, and then you do a pair of Windows servers, and then you get Windows clustering working, and then you also have a iSCSI mount point. And then once you get all that working, and then we put SQL clustering services on top of that. So it's a really cool lab of all the cool stuff that we're connecting. A lot of layers of stuff. So that one, we have to have a nice clean environment when we start that one. And then once we do that one, then we wipe it all again back to just the gateway, and then build the prep environment for the practical. And that one will have a Red Hat server. It'll have a domain, or it'll have 5 servers plus the gateway. It'll be prepped for that. Yeah.
So
I have lots of instructions out there. And also I will be here for help.
like I've done like
Yeah, it was a long time ago for you.
yeah, like I don't know how to do Red Hat.
Yep.
I know how to do Windows, but Red Hat is just
Yeah, and you guys did Red Hat Academy stuff, and you did the Ansible stuff, but it's one that actually doing it on a Red Hat server is something that you may be rusty at. I know that that's part of why having me as a resource in here is going to be really helpful this week, is so that when you guys hit something, they're like, I forgot how to do this, or I don't remember how to do this, that we can work through it to make sure that you guys actually get through it. 30 to 12. Yeah. Current VMware workstation is what you want. VMware workstation Pro patch to current. So if you get the 17 flat, it'll say if there's an upgrade. And yeah. Okay. One of the things also is my documentation will not, like I said, give you a full cookbook. It might get you 70 to 80% of the way in the lab, and then leave some gaps. That's intentional, because this is what I'm trying to do, is have the documentation in the lab more like the documentation you're going to find like on a Microsoft site or on a tech blog or something like that, that will give you the basics of how to solve your problem. And then you have to use your resources in order how to finish it. And so the resources, this is where your Google Ninja skills come in, and potentially ChatGPT. So those are legitimate resources to use when you're stuck. So that is one of the things that, just heads up on that, is that the labs are not cookbooks. What the labs are is, here's the process of what you need to do. Here are the things that you should already know. So I'm not even going to give you instructions. I just say, here's the environment that you start. And then once you get that set up, start the lab on top of that. This is really, I'm going to be stretching you guys and your skills a lot to get you ready to get out here. This is more starting to get into that real world scenario that the boss says, I need a SQL server spun up. Here's the basics. And then you go get it spun up. So there is not a to Z how to do it. It's not a cookbook. It's here is the process of what you need to accomplish and what the deliverables are, and then how you get most of the deliverables are included. If there are things I expect that you already know, that's where I tend to leave stuff out. Okay, for ISOs. So what I did do is I got creative because it was one of my problems that we've had in the past. Is I used to have an ISO directory in each of the virtual machines, and I had to copy the files up there, and it was like incredibly annoying because if you have drift in that, there would be different versions of things floating on different servers. So now I have an NFS mount that I control one server. I put all the files there, and then you guys all see it as an ISO's data store, and then all of your ISOs you need are housed there. So everything you need is going to be in the data store. Yeah. So when you log into your server, when you look at your data stores, you'll actually see a data store called ISOs. And that ISOs data store will have a Microsoft folder, a Red Hat folder that has all the different ISOs that you need for any of the server building. So everything is right there, nice and easy to find. Yeah. In your blade, all the ISOs are right there. Yeah, yeah. And it's another, if you have questions on how to utilize those, let me know and I can help facilitate that. Yeah. Okay, so server Linux. It's one of those weird marriages that never thought it would happen. I was shocked when Microsoft decided to actually play nice with Linux, because I grew up in the era of being a Microsoft server admin, where they very actively were trying to kill the open source movement because they saw it as competition and that it was something that went against their whole philosophy. When the old guard left, which is the Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and the new guard came in, they actually embraced Linux on the back end. A lot of the back servers running some of the mail services for Microsoft are running on Linux servers. It's actually a Microsoft flavor of Linux that they have their own distro. It's just not a public distro. And they discovered that Microsoft SQL Server actually runs better on Linux than it does on Windows. So it's easier to install on Linux than it is Windows also, which is going to be one of the craziest, because you can install it on Linux first and you're going to go, that was really pretty easy. And then when we installed it on Windows, like, oh my God, this is really. So it is one of those weird things that Microsoft SQL Server has been around forever. So what is this called Microsoft SQL? Yeah, question. Just playing with your hair. Okay. So it's a relational database. And earlier in the semester, we talked about relational databases back in AWS. So a database that's using this SQL script language so that you can do queries of database structures that are stored in tables. So the way to think about it is like Microsoft Excel, rows, columns, tables. All the data is stored in there. Every field has to have an entry. That's part of the relational database. Is if you think about an Excel spreadsheet, every single cell needs to be actually filled in. So SQL Server has been around for a long time. It originally came out of a partnership. Microsoft and Sybase developed SQL in 1989, OS2. So it was like a double collaboration. So OS2 was a collaboration between Microsoft and IBM. And SQL was a collaboration between Sybase and Microsoft. And so at that time, Microsoft was playing with all sorts of other people because they weren't a very big company at that point, and they didn't have a lot of resources, so they were leveraging other people to help develop stuff. And SQL Server 1 was released in 1989 for OS2. It was the first multi-threading operating system. So OS2 was the IBM release. The Windows release, when Microsoft and IBM sort of had their falling out and went their own ways, was Windows NT4. So that's where pretty much the Windows Server line came from. At the same time, Microsoft and Sybase also had a falling out, and so Microsoft SQL Server and Sybase database server split at that point as well. So Sybase went its own way, Microsoft went its own way with SQL, but the product had a similar software code base at that point. That's where they started from. So it's a client-server architecture. So what do you mean by client-server architecture with Microsoft SQL Server? So here we have a conversation. We have a kid asking mom for a cup of coffee. So you have a query or a request to the server for something. That's your client server communications. Looking at this going, I thought I had a slightly different slide deck last night when I was working through this. I guess, yeah, this is what I wanted. So key components of a Microsoft SQL Server. So you have your database engine. You have the SQL Server service. So one of the things that you're going to run into when we're playing with SQL Server is there's a lot of different services under the covers of how all this works. And usually when you run into problems, what it is one of the services is not started. Most of the time, the services that aren't started, that are going to give you all sorts of annoying things, are going to be the Microsoft SQL Server agent service. Because the agent service controls backups, it controls notifications, and it controls all of the maintenance jobs. So if your agent service isn't working, all don't. Yeah.
I just want to make sure.
Yep. Yeah, I am. SQL Server browser service is where SQL Server can be very promiscuous and say, "Hi, I'm here. Please connect to me on the network." And usually you don't turn that on because part of the problem is with database servers, you really don't want to be totally broadcasting and advertising saying, "Here I am. Please connect to me," because database servers are probably the biggest target out there for if you want to do any sort of a hacking thing, and you want to protect your database services as best you can. So having them just sort of advertising going, "Please connect to me," and everybody can see it on their desktops when they click on networks isn't really a good thing. So, yeah. Yep. Okay, user ID is root. Yeah. User ID on VMware box is always going to be root. The password I sent you guys. Yeah. So SQL Server agent service, you want to always make sure is on. SQL Server service, also you want to make sure is on, because if that's not on, you don't have a SQL Server to talk to. The rest of the services, pretty much we don't need to worry about for what we're doing in our case. If you're a database administrator, you're going to deal with a lot of those. For what we're dealing with, we don't need to worry about the other services. So the big ones that you're going to want to look at are going to be agent. We'll go over what those look like a little later on. So it's been around a long time. So there's a lot of flavors of SQL Server out there. If you are a sysadmin and you're working in a shop, you potentially will see anything from about here down, from SQL Server 2008 to about SQL Server 2022. So SQL Server 2025 is supposed to come out in beta this October. So you may start seeing or hearing about that. Windows Server 2025 is also supposed to be coming out in beta, and possibly Windows 12. So there's a couple that they're looking at 20 to be a big release year. Yeah. It's Microsoft. Yeah. AS 11 did not release as strong as they had hoped, so they're already.
And no, be all offering.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Microsoft says it's going to be the best.
Yeah.
Internet
Internet Explorer was supposed to be the last browser you ever needed. So it's Microsoft.
Existed.
Yeah, it's actively being removed out of systems now by updates. Yeah.
Microsoft. Microsoft Edge is like, you should use Microsoft Edge. I'm just
Yeah.
like, no. I use Microsoft Edge.
Okay, so one of the things about SQL Server that's going to really trip you guys up is this idea of instances. So part of the thing is when you install a single Microsoft SQL Server, what it is there's an instance. So there's one instance that's your default instance. So that's is a single instance, has its own name, which can identify it on the network, and it can be managed independently, allowing administrators to connect to it. So there's two different types of instances. You have a primary instance, which is the default instance installed when you install SQL servers on the computer. It's identified by the computer name alone, doesn't require a unique instance name. So if your computer was bluewave.dunwoody.edu, you would connect to the SQL server bluewave.dunwoody.edu. Straightforward. Primary instance is responsible for managing all the other instances. And if you're just doing it in a smaller environment, that's all you're going to usually set up. When you install Microsoft SQL Server, if you run into problems and install it again, what usually happens is then you wind up with a named instance and a primary instance, and you get really confused about what the heck's going on. Because what a named instance is you can have up to 50 named instances on top of the primary instance. And what named instances are is they're a separate database, whole database environment. Basically, think about it, named instance, or the primary instance is your hypervisor, and all the named instances are virtualized databases on top of that. And so you can have up to 50 of those per Microsoft SQL Server. And the way you navigate to them is that they are the primary instance name slash the named instance name. And so if you happen to have it that you've gone through the process of installing Microsoft SQL Server, which unfortunately is really ugly, that if it fails, what you want to do is revert back to a clean snapshot of that and start over. Because otherwise what happens is it finds the pieces of what you had installed and said, oh, there's already a primary instance here, so I'm going to do this next one as a named instance, but the primary instance never actually properly set up. So that hypervisor layer basically isn't functioning properly and really slowly. Or you get lucky and there was enough of that primary instance to work that you can do the named instance, but then you go to connect remotely and you can't because you don't realize it's a named instance and you're trying to just do the server name, but you're doing a slash something because you didn't realize there was a slash something when you did the install. Biggest places people get tripped up when we first started installing SQL Server is that something happens along the install process to make it go squirrely. You try installing again without getting back to a clean, known good state, and then it puts a named instance on top of a primary. So that's just be aware of that if you're having problems connecting, that may be one of the things that goes squirrely on you. So you'd be connecting, let's say we were connecting just on the local, we would do the name. So we're just doing localhost slash this particular server's name is Juliet for the named instance. Whereas when we're connecting to primary instance, on this one, the server name is romeo.capulet.local and connect either IP address. So you can connect with a name, DNS name, or the IP address, either will work. And the same for the named instance, you just have to have the slash and the named instance name. And once we get to the part of how we're connecting using SQL Management Studio, which I'll talk about just probably tomorrow, we'll go over that. So why would you want to use instances? It sounds like it's really confusing, and it is when you're first learning about it. But the reason being is you can have different versions on the same machine. So let's say you needed to have a SQL 2022 version for one application, but you have another application that won't work 2022 and needed 19. You can actually have multiple flavors of SQL living on the same box by having named instances. SQL Server licenses for enterprise or data licensing are very expensive. We're talking $10,000 a year for enterprise pricing. Yeah. So if you have one server have 50 databases on it for that $10,000, or you need to spend $10,000 per server, named instances are a really good thing. For maintenance and development, production, and test environments, you can actually have those spun up so you have your named instance, prod, dev, test in the same box. From a security standpoint, I would never want to do that. But from a cost standpoint, it's really cool. So you can see where cloud services are handy. You're able to isolate those a little easier, and you don't have that cost model problem. Whereas this is how you do it in a on-prem or a virtualized world. Yeah. Yeah. No, you can do SQL in the cloud. Yeah, Microsoft SQL is available in AWS and Azure.
Okay,
But-
I thought you were talking about how cloud is.
But this is designed originally as a on-prem rack and stack product, so all of the ideas behind it are very much an on-prem rack and stack concept, and the costs are associated that way too. Reducing temporary database problems, so having multiple instances to do that. Separating security privileges by having separate instances. Each instance has its own security. So one of the things that we'll get to once we have our environments built more is that security on Microsoft SQL Server is really weird. Because normal Windows security is you have Active Directory and all the accounts are in Active Directory. In Microsoft SQL Server, it lives on top of the Windows world and can be totally separate, or it can reference Active Directory, but it is a separate security mechanism from Active Directory itself. So all the user information and user access is controlled within that SQL environment itself. So by having named instances, you can also isolate security realms. And made instance standby is sort of handy. So there's 4 major flavors of SQL Server as of SQL 2019. Enterprise Standard, Express, and Developer. What we're going to be using is basically Developer, which is enterprise without being able to use it in a production environment. So SQL on Linux is available on Linux, but very picky. Only runs on Red Hat, SUSE, or Ubuntu. Can't run on any other distros of Linux. So they are very, very picky about what you can run. So that is one of the things you have to think of if you're going to run SQL on top of Linux. Tied to those distro managers. Maybe. Most likely, since this Microsoft probably is definitely not supported, and then it's a lot of ifs, and you might not be able to license. So you might be able to do like a developer type thing, but you won't be able to do a production environment. So enterprise, the reason enterprise is the one that you want to use, and it's why it costs the big bucks, and it costs like $10,000 a year for licensing. Unlimited virtualization. So what that means is one enterprise license, you can spin up as many virtual SQL servers as you want, which is really cool. Back when I was an admin, I had a hard time initially convincing my boss to buy enterprise licensing, even at academic pricing, because that was like $5K a year. But I went, we have 24 SQL servers. If we're buying regular licensing, that's still about $800 a year per server. And we're limited that we have to buy a new license for every single server we spin up. If we do this in our ESX environment or a vCenter environment, I buy one license, we're good. That's all I need. So that's one where enterprise license makes a whole lot of sense. Maximum database size, 524 petabytes. So pretty decent sized database. Yeah. Definitely in production, maximum memory as much as the operating system will support. And max core is unlimited. So pretty much enterprise is designed as big a box as you can throw at it, it will handle it. Standard, which is what if you buy, let's say I buy a server from Dell that has SQL Server already pre-built on it. It's going to come with a standard license. Max, you can at max have 4 cores, 4 sockets, 24 cores. Memory only 128 gigs, which it used to sound like so much, but nowadays the server is puny. Yeah. Maximum database size is still 524 petabytes, can be used in production, but this one is licensed per server, even virtualized. So you need to spend the money per license per server instance. Server instance has to have its own unique license. So there are use cases where that makes sense. If you're working for a nonprofit and you have one SQL server, that's perfect. It's relatively cheap. If you're in an environment that has a bunch of SQL servers, boy, you don't want to go anywhere near standard. You'll find that they're running standard because that's what they. Usually, if you buy a piece of hardware and it comes with a license that you can SQL on it, it'll come with a standard license. Express is the free one. So this is more for developers. It's more of a really super lightweight version of SQL. It runs things like Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Basic, but the Visual Studio Suite for development. SQL Server Express on the desktop, yeah. Less than 1,000. Yeah. And that's the enterprise education is usually half that. Yeah. Any of the Microsoft licensing personal ones, it's just Microsoft licensing is designed to be a package deal. And what you do is you do a that includes X amount of OS, X amount of server, all the other Microsoft 365. They basically bid it out. Cost it. And the cost and everything else. So it gets really messy. But for your stuff on your own and it's not actually in a production state, great, because it's enterprise and it's free. You just can't use it as anything that's a truly production type thing. And then developer, it's in virtualization. No, it actually works just fine in virtualization. It's just that you can't use it in a production environment. So basically, when Microsoft comes and does their audits, which they basically have a little, when you have that licensing agreement, part of the licensing agreement provision is they basically once a year have you run a little widget on your network, finds all the Microsoft devices on the network and says, this is how many licenses you're currently consuming. Here's what you're currently licensed for. Here's what your true up cost is if you're not in compliance. So it's one of those that if you're running developer production, that's where you get dinged on. And if you aren't using a agreement like that, where you have the true up every, and they find that you're using developer production or other things that you aren't using, the fines can be pretty steep. Microsoft is very litigious and really likes going after people. The other thing is if you have Microsoft certifications and you're a sysadmin and you're the sysadmin that spun up stuff that wasn't licensed properly, they can yank your credentials. So it's the other thing to be aware of. Yeah, question? Okay. So what are you going to be building this week? So I sent your blade credentials via Canvas last night. So everybody should in Canvas have your credentials for your blades. Again, ESX servers, the default user ID is root with lowercase r. Password is in your credentials, IP is in your credentials. You can get to the server web browser or through VMware workstation. There are certain tasks that you need to do that are easier or sometimes only possible to do using the web client. And it's usually when we get into things like networking. So networking on the ESX server, which we won't get to till we do the cluster, that you have to do a step of it in the web browser because it's not available in VMware Workstation's interface. But everything else you can do pretty much through VMware Workstation. Oh, no. The biggest thing with building your gateway is to be patient after you spin up the OS with the two NICs, that you have to wait for both NICs to get registered on the system. And then when you're doing the routing and remote access, that has to recognize both NICs, and then it works pretty slick. Yeah, question. You should be able to say continue without. Yeah, that's better. Or when you're building servers, always do custom. Never do use the recommended settings. If you do the recommended settings, your world is going to be in a world of hurt really quick. Oh, that would totally be the problem you had during Windows setup. Yeah, because what happens when you do the recommended is it will take what are like some default settings that it thinks are best, but then you don't get to control any of those settings. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, because part of what happens is it builds a profile script when you use recommended settings, and then it wants to use it every time you build a server, and you can't actually manually go in and change stuff, and it just makes your life, yeah. Yes. So once I get through this, I'll actually walk through a couple of the environments and just walk you through what all the features are, so you guys understand them a little better. But I have them all available in your data store, so it's going to be really easy. Yeah. What's that?
Yeah, so key drive is the TARDIS network drive.
Yeah, you can't install there.
Yeah, no, I have it disconnected anyway.
Yep.
And it's still trying to.
So did you
Tried reinstalling everything.
did you bring your install local, or were you trying to launch it from TARDIS? Okay. I'm gonna come back around and I'll see if I can help on that, but just let me get through this and then I'll circle around to help people because. Okay, so building this week. So you're gonna have 2 Windows 2019 servers, and you want to do data center with GUI. So you want data center with customer experience when you select the menus, because if you don't, you're going to get the command line only version, and that's really going to make you sad and you aren't going to be able to do anything. So just when you're going through the install, it'll give you a little menu and it says which version of 2019 server do you want, and you need to make sure you select 2019 with data center with desktop experience. So yeah, yep. So one of them will be a DC. The other is going to be a member server of that domain. And that's one of those. I do have a cheat sheet out there to make a member server in case you guys forgot. It's one of those things that you should remember from last semester, but just in case you forgot, I do have a cheat sheet out there. And then we're going to spin up a Red Hat 8.7 server with internet access. And you need to make sure you register it with your Red Hat developer ID to get the updates. If you don't register it with Red Hat, you will not be able to install SQL. Because in order to install SQL, you're going to need to bring your Red Hat server to current, and you're going to need to be able to get to a GitHub repository to grab SQL Server to do the install. If you don't have it registered, you're going to be able to do any of that. It'll be a really important thing, and remember, it's your Red Hat ID that you'll use to do the registration. And again, that's one of those things that if you run into problems, I'm here as a resource in class to help you through that, because it is one of those. Good deal. Okay, so for the NAT server, so the gateway server, what is this gateway server thing, in case you guys forgot what the gateway server is? So it's a Windows NAT server. So in AWS, we did NAT gateways. It's the same sort of idea, is it's doing address translation. So what we're doing is we're taking our hypervisor, we're creating a private network that is not routable to the campus network inside that. And then we're having a NAT server, which is going to be a Windows box that's translating traffic from outside world to inside world. And so that way we're able to have this totally isolated network that we can do whatever the heck we want, and it won't bother the campus network. So it is one that we want to make sure that all of the servers, when we're setting them up, are not set to the campus network, that they're all going to be set to the internal network for our connectivity. Because if you set them to the external network, you're going to have all sorts of problems. So domain controller, you should be pretty familiar with the domain controller. You guys built a bunch of them last semester and back in Sharon's class way back when. Red Hat 8, you've been using Red Hat 8 and 7 for a while now in other classes, but you probably haven't actually spun stuff up in a while. The Red Hat part is where I have stuff more cookbook than others as far as what commands you need to put in. The server setup is relatively straightforward, and I do actually have a pointer out there to the whole how to set up a Red Hat server document that I have, just in case somebody forgot that and hadn't done it in a while and you're rusty. Basic network design of what we're going to have. IPs aren't right, but basically we have a NAT server to the campus network. We have an internal network. We're going to have our 3 servers network. Domain controller, Red Hat Linux server. And then the third server is going to be the member server that we will install a software package on it called SQL Server Management Studio. because normally you do not manage SQL Server on the server itself. What it is you use, and this is weird things, it's a legacy thing that it's one of the few Microsoft products that's still set up this way, that it has a client server model for management. Is that you manage the server from an application that you install either on your laptop or on a Bastion host. And then that application server is running SQL Server Management Studio to then manage all of the SQL servers in the environment or in Microsoft Azure or AWS. So it's one tool that you can manage multiple servers from, but it is a separate tool that you install. And so we'll be installing that, I believe, in Lab 2. Okay, tennis code for today is yellow water. And then I'll walk through some of the bits and pieces here to have you guys see if I can help answer some questions, and then I'll circulate around to help answer specific questions. Okay. Sure. Okay. So I got my VMware workstation here. Let me get my IP of the server I'm going to do my demo on. Okay, so just a reminder, if you're going to connect the first time, so what you want to do is connect to a remote server. Server name is going to be IP address. You're going to have squirreliness if you aren't on the current version. Behavior that people were seeing with the Dunwoody build of the laptops is it would freeze up. Is you'd be working and all of a sudden the whole screen just didn't do anything. Yeah, let me just do a quick demo and then I'll circle around. Okay. Okay, first time it's going to come up and it's going to say invalid certificate. So we know that. What we want to do is just say trust that, connect anyways. And you'll connect to your virtual machine or your host. And so what you can see is you'll see how much CPU you have, memory, and you'll see that there's two data stores, one called ISOs, one called data store 1, how much storage you have and how much memory you have. If you go through the web client, you'll also get a connection not private warning because we're using HTTPS, but we're using a self-signed cert so that warning is normal. So click on advanced, and yes, we know it's unsafe. We're going to go there anyways. User ID is going to be root, lowercase, and our password, and log in. And so when you log in through the web client, the difference is going to be that if you need to do anything with networking and setting up networking, you're going to do it through the web client. You can't do that through VMware Workstation. So that is the one place that you can't do those settings locally through VMware Workstation. So anything dealing with networking, you'll be in the web client. For the virtual machines, everything else you'll be able to do from the actual VMware Workstation. So once we're in VMware Workstation, we can go back and we're going to say we want to create a new virtual machine. So if you create a new virtual machine, you always want to select custom. And you're going to build in the data store. You can't build in ISOs because ISOs is a read-only directory. You can't build anything in ISO. So make sure you're building in your data store. And do the default for compatibility. And so this first one we're going to do is we're going to build our gateway server. So we're going to go, yep. I just took the default ESX 6.7, which it depends on which version of ESX you're running. Some of you will have 6.5, some of you will have 6.7. Yeah, because it's whatever ESX version your blade is running. So a couple of them I was able to upgrade to 6.7. Most of them are running 6.5. So we're doing Windows, and then we want to go to, if you're running 6.5, you won't see, yours will say 2012 or 2016. If you're running 6.7, it'll say 2016 or later. So what you want to do is 2016 64-bit is what you're going to want to select. If you guys have the newer VMware Workstation client, it might actually give you the 2019 or even 2022 as an option. So we're going to, on this particular one, we're going to say 2016 or later. We're going to give our virtual machine a name. And on this particular lab, this one is called Gateway. And then what you're going to want to do is append at the end of the server name for Gateway the last octet of your IP address. Because otherwise what will happen is we will have everybody's machines on the campus network on one of their NICs with the same name, and that may cause problems. So you want to have yours be unique to everybody in class. So if you use the gateway and the last octet of your IP address, that'll keep them unique. Then next. You can do UEFI or traditional BIOS. Either will work. UEFI just is a little trickier when you do the install. So I'll actually walk through that one just to let you guys see how it works. I'll select next. If you're doing server 2022, you have to do UEFI. If you're doing Windows 11, you have to do UEFI. If you're doing server 2019 or Windows 10, you could do either. So UEFI is what you want to do if you need to do secure boot or if you need to encrypt the drive. Since we don't need to do those, I'm just doing it as an example to just show you. But either of them will work for 2019. Good question, though. Okay, on this particular one, I don't need much because all this is going to be doing is a NAT gateway. So I'm going to just leave it at one processor and one core. Leave it at the default memory of 4096. Okay, and so the network connection. So I'm going to leave it at the regular default network connection. And actually, what I want to do on this one is I don't want that. So I'm going to go back to my web browser. Yep. Yeah, that's what I was just going to show you. So what we want to do is if we go to the web client, you'll want to look at your networking and see how it's defined. And so what mine currently has is it has the VM network and it has a management network. And so what I want to do is I'm going to add an external and an internal network, and it's going to make your lives much easier when building this server. So I'm going to add under virtual switches, I'm going to add a standard virtual switch, and I'm going to call this one internal. And then I'm going to remove the uplink. So there is no NIC associated with this particular network. Select add. Then I'm going to go to a port group, add a port group, and I'm also going to call this one internal port group. So internal PG, and I'm going to attach that to that new internal switch I just made and select add. So now that's my internal network. It does not have a NIC to get to the outside world. It's only internal. So that is going to be our internal network that we're going to build all of our servers. That's what we're going to attach our servers to. And then for external connectivity, we're going to go back into our virtual switches, add a virtual switch. We'll call this external. We'll keep the uplink for the external one because we want it to talk to the outside world. Select add. So now we have a virtual switch external. We'll go to port groups, add a port group, and we'll do external port group. And for virtual switch, we'll select external. So we have an external port group, external virtual switch, select add. So now we have an external and internal port groups. So now that we have those, when we go back into VMware, it's not going to show them right away. And that's what's sort of annoying, because what I'm going to actually have to do is restart my process of connecting. So I'm going to just say recreate a new virtual machine, go to custom, next, next, Microsoft 2016, gateway, 158, UEFI, 4. Okay. And so what you're seeing here is that it's not showing us our networks. And so the first virtual machine you build, sometimes you run into this. And if you run into this, the best workaround that I found is what Oliver was talking about earlier, is that we'll actually go through for our first server that we build, do it in the web interface. And so if we create our virtual machine here, so we're going to create a new virtual machine. And it's ESX6, guest OS family is going to be Windows. And this one, and where to go? 16 or later. Data store 1. What's interesting is on this one, oh yeah, it still did the same virtual CPUs. And now all of a sudden we see that the networks show up here properly. And so if your networks aren't showing up properly in VMware Workstation, do it in the web client for your first one. Yeah. What you want is like one CPU with one core, so it doesn't really matter. It's not going to use that much oomph. So what you want to do is you're going to add a second network adapter and make that one internal. And then under the CD drive, what you want to do is say that you want to have it instead of the host device, you want to say data store ISO file. And then that's where you're going to see your ISOs repository. And then you're just going to go to the Windows Server. And then you want the Windows 2019 evaluation, which is a 180-day eval that we're using. Select. And then make sure it doesn't have any video cards or anything else funky, which it doesn't. And then we can select next. Has everything we need. Select finish. Okay, so now we've gotten that far on here. We can actually go back to our VMware client workstation. And now you can see that Gateway 158 is being built. You can actually double click on that. And then we're able to actually go from there using the VMware workstation. So we're going to power on that virtual machine. And while that's powering on, so this part right there, press any key to boot. That's the part that UEFI does. Is if you're using the UEFI BIOS, by default, you have to actually press a key to advance past that. If you're using the traditional BIOS, it'll just go and look for the drives. So that's just one of those things you have to be quick enough to actually be watching it when it gets to that point to hit the any key, the infamous any key, and then it'll pass past that. And then here we get the normal, okay, we're installing Windows. We're installing now. Okay, here's the one that's the important one to make sure you select the right version of the OS. So you want the bottom one, data center, desktop experience. Click next. Oh, did I grab the wrong? I must have grabbed the wrong ISO. Good catch. I wonder if I got my ISOs mixed up. Let me cancel out and see if I can switch ISOs. And did I relabeled the ISOs after because I downloaded fresh copies over the weekend? And I wouldn't be surprised if I did something crazy like, come on. No, that is at the Windows side. So I'm going to edit my virtual machine settings. So I'm going to just try pointing it to the 2022 ISO and see if I get the other. I might just need to rename my ISO images. Yeah. It's like we could potentially do 2022, but I know the labs work on 2019. I haven't tried them on 2022. So we're going to want to build them on 2019. Yeah, I just flipped the names. Let me fix that quick. Yeah. I just need to connect to. Actually, I can't do it while it's. Yeah, while we're building servers, I can't. So for now, just select the 2022 ISO if you're building it right now, and then I will rename them later after people aren't using them. It depends on how far you got. If you've already installed the whole operating system, because 2022 won't necessarily work with the labs. Yeah, the one that says 2022, because that's actually the 2019 ISO image. Because when they come down, they just have like a cryptic code associated with the ISO images. And I went with the one that was larger, thinking that would be the one that was 2022, but it was actually 2019. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay, so accept the terms. Next. Custom. Next. Well, that was a good catch, though, because I didn't even notice that. It was right in front of me, and I was looking to make sure it was the right version, but I didn't look at the OS version. Yeah, no, Microsoft isn't that smart.
I want to do a custom install Windows on.
Yep.
Yep, I figured out my solution, my issue from last semester.
Okay, the ISO images for moving forward have been renamed. So if you're grabbing them after this point, you'll get the right image now. Okay, so oh, they're already on your server. So when you're building your server, yep, custom. Yep. Next, just the default on that one. And then select your version. So it's 2016 or later. Then give it a name. So it'd be Gateway and then the 157 for your. Yep. We're not going to do secure boot because then default there is fine. Fine. And let's see if you see your other networks. Nope. So you're going to need to do these steps in the web client for your first server. Or see all the other networks. It's just that first time through that it gets a little cranky on it. Going okay? Workstation, yeah. So what it is we can't see the right networks. So we can just hit cancel on this and we're going to actually get through these steps using the web client instead.
Why couldn't get lab stuff?
If you were doing custom, that would have really totally blown you out of the water.
I think I found my issue.
Yeah.
Because
So I have fixed the ISO image. Images. Okay. Yeah, oh yeah, that would have made it a lot easier because it puts really funky things in when you do that.
and I'm like, because like when you said that, I'm like, I did not do that last semester. I did the because now that I'm thinking about it, I think he had lab instructions that said do the standard one or like the recommended one, but he told us in class
Not to.
not to do it. And I think that because I didn't do it in class, I did it when I got home. I followed the instructions instead of not listening to him.
That would do it. Okay, so while that one's building, what I can do is just do a quick demo of the Linux one because we can build that while the other one is running. So new virtual machine, custom, and now we should actually see our other networks. So we got Linux, and in Linux we're going to run into the same problem. Oh, it does say actually find Linux 8 for mine. I think yours might only see Linux 64-bit if you're running 6.5. And the server name will be in the lab doc. Yeah, well, I was actually going to walk through just a little piece on the labs. So in the lab documents, what you're going to see at the top of it is this is the environment that needs to be in existence before you start the lab. And so what it'll have is in this particular one, we're going to be building 4 servers. We're going to have our gateway server, our domain controller, a member server of that domain, and the Red Hat server. The names of each of the servers are listed. Their IPs we're going to use are listed. The domain for the domain controller is listed. The internal DNS for our domain controller, what those should be. And then our external gateway that we're going to use in order to get out. And so what we're going to do is when you set up your gateway server, its internal IP is going to be this one, which is what the other ones will use to get out of the network. So this top part here will be sort of your cookbook for the labs of what the environment needs to be built out like. Yeah. 8.7. So if you have 6.5, your only option is going to be up to Red Hat 7. If you have 6.7, you'll get the option of Red Hat 8. Okay. So we got those. So the server name that we're going to have for our Linux server is Vulkan. And its IP address is going to be 192.168.79.50. So our server's name is Vulkan. Select next. Correct. Yep, it's only if it's on the external network, because then you would conflict with other names of other stuff. But since it's on our internal private network, we aren't colliding with anything. For your Linux server, you do want to select regular BIOS, not UEFI. And on that one, if we go back to our lab doc, here we say for Vulkan, it's going to have 2 processors and 4 gig of memory with a 60 gig thickly provisioned hard drive. One of the things with database servers is that you don't want to thin provision the hard drives. The reason behind that is with a database server and how thin provisioning works is thin provisioning, you tell the OS you got 100 gigs. But in reality, it's only doing what it's currently using with a little bit of overhead. With a database server, you don't want to do that, because what can happen is you can have the database chew up a whole lot of space really fast, and faster than the OS can actually respond to it. And then what you have is that will cause database corruption. Because the database says, I have 100 gigs to work with, I'm going to use 100 gigs, and I'm going to start doing stuff right now. And the OS goes, I can't respond that quickly dynamically. And all of a sudden, it's asking for more storage than it has, and then bad things start happening. So rule of thumb is if you're building a database on top of a server and is virtualized, always, always, always thickly provision that storage. So that's one of the things so in the labs, you will see some drives can be thinly provisioned, others are thickly provisioned. So when you thickly provision, what you're doing is you're saying, I'm carving out a full, in this case, 60 gigs from my data store that is applied just to the server. Rather than saying, I am telling the OS it gets 60 gigs, but if it's only using 5, that's all it's actually going to use with a little overhead. Okay, so we need 60 gigs, 2 processors, 4 gigs. So we got 2 processors. We're going to move that up to 4 gigs. A little more. Oh, it's still not seeing my other networks. Interesting. Let's try it this way. We're going to just disconnect and reconnect. And then try create a virtual machine.
Linux 7?
Hmm?
What Linux?
If yours doesn't have the option, then Red Hat 8, then go with Red Hat 7. BIOS, 2 processors, 4 gigs. There we go. Just so that your total is 2. So as you get up, either you could have 1 processor with 2 cores, that would work, or 2 processors with 1 core. Okay, so what I just did is I disconnected my instance and then reconnected my instance to the ESX server, and now I can see the additional networks. So if you aren't seeing your networks, that's one way to get them to show up once you've created them. So this is going to be on the internal network. And we'll use the default for the controller type and the virtual disk. We're going to create a new virtual disk. And then this is one where the naming convention does not match. So our disk size is going to be 40. And what we need to say is allocate all disk space now. That is thickly provisioned. If we kept it for the default is always thinly provisioned. And since we're building a database, we want to allocate all that space. So we're saying 40 gigs. 40 gigs? There's the 60. 60. Thought that was right. Okay, it's actually supposed to be 60. So 60 gigs, thickly provisioned. So allocate all the disk space now. Going to use that vm.k file. And then we want to go through customize the hardware. So if you're building it from VMware Workstation, it's going to want to throw a sound card in there. Get rid of that because you don't need it. And then you go into your CD drive, use an ISO image, browse, go to your ISO store, go to Red Hat. Oh, no, I didn't want Red Hat. Okay. That's weird. Not seeing my Red Hat 8 image up there. Okay, take a look at my server real quick. No, for some reason I don't have my RHEL 8 image up there. Let me get that put up there real quick. I only have a RHEL 9 image. And that won't do for what you guys need. I swore I downloaded that. Okay, so the Red Hat one we're gonna have to wait on just a little bit because I don't currently have the Red Hat 8.7 image where I thought I did. I have to find out where that went. So just as an example, I'm gonna just throw the Red Hat 9 in there. Okay, okay. Once your gateway system comes up, we want to use the same default password on everybody's systems. The reason being, if you get into the weeds on your systems and it's not during class hours, and you send me a ping saying, I have a problem with my server. If I can log into your server remotely and take a look at it and be able to send you a, here's what you need to fix, life is really easy. But if you use a unique password that I cannot get into, I cannot remotely log in to check what's happening, and I won't be able to fix things, and it will be until we can actually have a meeting or in class that I can fix things. So it just makes life really easier if we all use the same default password, which is the password 01 convention. Yep. 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 So it's capital P. And that will just make your life and my life easier. So my life supporting you and your life asking me questions. Because which one? If you're using, yeah, because that is the 9.1 image, and 9 is not currently supported by SQL. After class, I'll get that. I'll have that one uploaded right after class. I had it downloaded to my local machine when I was working, but I must not have uploaded it, or must not have finished. Yeah. The VPN. Yeah, yeah. So as long as you're connected through the VPN, then you're going to be able to pull up VMware Workstation and be able to work as if you're here. The thing that you can't do very quickly is move files back and forth. So that's why I made sure all the ISOs are available locally here on campus for you, so you don't have to try moving big files across. That can just be painful. It's not as bad as it used to be. But last week I was because I was doing a lot of this from Menominee over the weekend, and and that's part of why I think that ISO failed, is that I started it and then I didn't actually make sure it finished. And then I just made an assumption that it had finished. And we'll see if I can finish the gateway server real quick here before we run out of time. Yes. Yes. VMware Tools is going to be really, really important on these servers. What that does is that gives you video display, that gives you mouse drivers, and it also gives you better networking. So all those, especially when we start getting into the more advanced labs, are going to be really important. Okay. Actually, I should have stayed in Server Manager. So when your server first comes up, it's going to be in Server Manager. And so what we're going to want to do is go to local server. And the things that you want to do is, I like calling it sort of around the horn, is start here on the right and then work your way to the left. Since we do already have DHCP addresses, we're going to be able to get to the outside world. So what we want to do is turn off this IE enhanced security. Otherwise, you're going to have a really annoying time with the neg screens coming anytime you try doing anything. Set your time zone. So we want to change our time zone to Central Time. Go to your internet time. And we want to update now. Should be able to do. Okay. Select OK. Do a refresh, just make sure all those picked up. And we want to go over and we want to go into our Ethernet. Click on that. So we're going to have two different networks. And ideally, if we go into the status of those, that's interesting. Got an APIPA there. And an APIPA there. So I should. Yeah, well, what it is that we don't seem to be getting out to the outside world, because what you should see ideally is that one of your networks should say that it has a DHCP address from campus. Yeah, so something's not right on the networking. So let's see if we can resolve that quick. Okay, so external server NIC cable. Shouldn't it can. Oh, why'd the projector go off? Oh, that was weird. Weird. Because you should pull a DHCP address on your external network. I figure out why mine it's not.
I'm also not.
Okay. I wonder if I got some other issue going on. Well, we are out of time for today, so we will pick up where we left off tomorrow, but you can get the server itself built and get it to the point that we're at the networking, and I'll pick up at this point tomorrow, and I'll make sure that networking isn't funky. I will get the Red Hat server ISO set up on the VMware server so that we have the proper version of Red Hat 8.7 up there, and then we can pick up on this part tomorrow. Yeah, I will send you a reinvite, or actually you already accepted it. Yeah, we'll do that. Send me an email to remind me, because I'm going into a meeting right after this one for the budget for next year, so I'm going to be heads down in numbers for the next hour and a half.
17 if we have 16 or
You may. And that you just need to go to the same place that you grabbed your license from before, and you can just get a new license. That's the part that I'll post it up in Canvas with the link, because I think enough people need to grab it. And then you click on the link and you should be able to just log in and grab it. But if you aren't, then you send me an email and I can make sure your account gets set up. Yeah, because it'll give you 30 days without the license code. So you get the first 30 days without needing the license. And then after that, you need to get your license. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, I was just getting that shut down and stopping the recording.